Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the 1969 Corvette Coupe Yenko in 125 scale. It's a Revell model kit number 85-4411. Now this is a true 2-in-1 kit featuring both Yenko and custom versions, and it's rated a skill level 5 for advanced builders. But most modelers with some experience should be able to put this one together without too much trouble. There's 123 parts molded in white, chrome, clear, and clear red with soft vinyl tires. And this is a re-released kit, and the copyright on the chassis is 1988. So since the kit's been packaged in different box arts, that may have led to some of the confusion regarding some of the parts numbering and the parts themselves. It's a highly detailed 427 motor and a nice chassis with a full interior and separate side panels for detailing. The body's crisply molded and has only a few mold lines to deal with. The chrome is bright and clean and the tires are nicely rendered. And this kit features 2 sets of wheels, exhaust systems, and hoods. The instructions are a little vague regarding some part placement in a few areas, but it does include color callouts. Overall, when you're done, they're about 8 5/8 inches long, 3 1/8 inches wide, and 2 inches high. So here are the kit's contents, and some people would call this an open box review. They'd pick up each part and sprue tree and try and come up with some words to describe them, but, well, it won't help you put the kit together now, will it? So you can see everything you need to see in about 10 seconds. Now, moving along, we're going to show you how to build this kit, and we'll show you some of the problem areas too. But remember to always follow the safety guidelines on the manufacturer's products for anything that you see here in the kit. Here are the decals for this kit. As you can see, the colors are great and the registry is very good. The decals can sometimes be a little tricky though, especially those long fender type decals, and I suggest you use some of the aftermarket setting solutions to make sure that they conform to the contours and stick to the model. Now we're going to be using mostly some Model Master liquid cement for gluing, but sometimes slow setting tube glue and even super glue for strength, and white glue for some of the clear parts. Here's some of the artwork on the side of the box that shows some of the Yenko versus the custom version that's included in the kit. The yellow one is the Yenko version and the purple one is the custom version. These are the parts for the Yenko model, but I've opted to build the custom version for this kit for reasons I'll explain later. Organization is very important when building your model, and one of the first things that I do is go through and identify the colors that are associated with the different parts. First I highlight the color, and then I go to each section of the instructions and I use the same color code for each of the parts that has the same color. Going over the parts inventory, I also noticed that some of the parts have the same number, even though they're different parts. And then there are some parts that are exactly the same that have different part numbers. There's even some parts that are just plain duplicates. You get spares, like the fan belt assembly and the rocker covers. And then there are parts that aren't even mentioned in the kit or used in the kit, and well, those came to my advantage in a way. So there was a lot of confusion when they packaged these parts up for this kit, because it's been reissued in so many different models. But nonetheless, everything's there, and if you use all the parts that you want to use the way you want to use them, it actually turns out to be a bonus. So after I'd identified all the parts that are painted the same color, that's what I did. I painted them all the same color and let them dry. Then I started working on the body by prepping it. And I noticed that there were some pronounced parting line or mold lines on the body, which you can see in the visuals here with the black highlights, that need to be cleaned and trimmed and finished off nicely. And there's also some script work that I removed from the body so that the decals that are supposed to cover those scripts would actually stick to a nice smooth surface and without convolutions and warpage from the script under below. Next I did a little cleanup on the body parts, and I painted them with primer gray along with some associated parts that will need a light gray primer. And then I took the parts that will be painted semi-gloss black and gave them a semi-gloss black paint front and back. Another very important thing that you can do when you're building a model is to check for paint compatibility when you're using different brands. In this case, I used different primers, color coats, and overcoat clears, so I did the spoon test. Take a styrene spoon and paint it just like you would your model to make sure there are no adverse reactions after the coats are applied. Here's the copyright script on the other side of the chassis. You can see it from outside the vehicle, so if you're building a contest car, remove it with a knife, a hobby knife, and then sand it smooth. Some of the parts that were painted chrome were just too bright. The manifold, for example, is more of an aluminum. I never saw a chrome manifold, so I took the parts that I wanted to dull up a little bit and I sprayed them with some clear flat spray. It makes them almost look like a nice clean aluminum and cuts that real heavy shine. Next, I finished off the wheels by using some magnesium gray for the spokes, and then I also used some black wash, which is a 50-50 thinner and flat black paint, to paint both the insets on the wheels and I also painted the ribs on the side pipes with the thinner and the insets in the grill to make that kind of a blacked out area behind the highlighted chrome. I also painted the visors on the windshield black and some of the exhaust pipes. We'll start on construction next, but as a reminder, just make sure you remove any plating or paint from the areas that you want to glue so that the joints are good and strong and adhere to each other. I got out the parts for building the 427 for the custom version, not the Yenko engine, and put the block halves together, and there'll be a longitudinal seam on that thing that you'll have to address later. Then add the cylinder heads on the top and the water pump to the front of the motor, and when it's dry, go ahead and paint the motor portion of that Chevy engine orange and the transmission an aluminum color. Then we're going to add the intake manifold and give a gold tone to the carburetor, and of course the air cleaner is semi-gloss black. The starter is flat black with a gold tone solenoid, and you can add that to the engine now. Now you can add the alternator to the fan assembly and attach that to the front after the paint's dried, along with the fuel pump and the fan. Add the exhaust manifolds, which are steel color, and then the distributor. Now notice that I've added some black wash here to give the engine some definition where grime and maybe some oil drips would have accumulated on a normal engine to make it look more realistic. We'll use these parts to work on the rear suspension, and I end up painting my shock absorbers a blue color to add a little differentiation back there. But assemble the top half of the transmission pumpkin there, and then glue that together, and when that sets, go ahead and glue that into place, and then add the spring on top of that unit, and then add the shocks to the posts on the rear end. Now we'll grab these parts, including the chassis, to assemble the front end. And notice that the springs are chrome, and I decided to strip the chrome off of those by sprinkling them in a little cup with some easy off oven cleaner, and that takes the paint and the substrate right off so that you can paint them. And so I painted those semi-gloss black and assembled the front end structure as you can see here. Now we can assemble the radiator with front to the back side, and there's also a shroud which is not pictured in this group. It's a different part, but you'll find the shroud is one of those duplicate parts we talked about earlier with the same part number. But you put that together and assemble that as a unit to get it ready to go into the chassis. Now we can gather these parts to start assembling some of the chassis pieces, including the cross member, which is on the left there, and that'll go onto the bottom side of the chassis, and paint the drive shaft steel color and add some black wash to it, as well as the steering box there, and the rest of the parts are semi-gloss black. Now you can add the steering box to the driver's side on the chassis. There's a little angle slot there just to the side of the engine on the left side there, and you put that into place on the chassis, and the shaft there, the steering shaft, will angle up at about a 30-degree angle towards the firewall. Now put the pins of the drive shaft into place. One goes into the rear end, and then position the other one so that the motor will accept it at the end of the transmission when you're placing that into the cross member there. Here's a little tip to get those radiator angles and hoses set properly. Put a little slow setting glue, on the intake manifold there where the hose attaches, and also on the end of the water pump where that hose attaches. Let it get tacky, and then place the hoses on them, and then go ahead and set your radiator, and at the same time position the other end of the hoses to the radiator with some slow setting glue so that they attach to the proper points, and then the radiator will tip back into the correct angle. And there's also a decal now that you can put on the driver's side of the valve covers, and additionally we're going to add the upper A arms into place at this time. So go ahead and glue those into place. Just line them up so that they're correctly positioned. Grab these guys out of the kit so that we can assemble the wheels and tires. And go ahead and make sure you scrape the paint from contact surfaces on the rim backs and the rim fronts and the inside there. Then go ahead and press those together against into a tire and use a little glue to keep those together. And then I like to press and roll the tread of my tires on some fine sandpaper, about a 220 grit on a flat surface, to give it a used road-worn look. Now you can add the tires to the chassis on the spindle hubs there, and I used a flathead screwdriver to back up the backside of the spindle when pressing these into place because you don't want to break those off, and it takes quite a bit of pressure. So put some backing behind that to make sure that they snap on cleanly and fit firmly. You'll now have a rolling chassis to build the rest of your model on. Now grab these parts and we're going to start working on the interior. And the dashboard and the steering column and the wheel all are part of the same module. So we're going to add the decals by just cutting those out and gluing them in with some white glue, not taking them off as transfers, decals, and just the whole thing. Just put it in there so that the white backing is still intact. And I also, a little tip there, use a little crystal clear micro product here to add some lens-like glossiness over some of the gauges to give it a more of a lens look. On top of the dashboard there is a mold line, heavy mold line that splits the top of the dash, and I scraped that off and sanded that smooth because that's not part of the real car. So completely remove that seam so that you get a nice smooth top to your dashboard. I painted the top of the dash pad gold to match the accents that I'm going to use on the interior, and also the spokes were aluminum, so I painted those aluminum color, and the column mast I painted gold as well. And there's a decal, decal number 3 goes right on the horn button there on the steering column too. After the paint's dried on the column, you can assemble the column and the steering wheel and then add that to the dashboard in the slot provided there. Now we'll grab the main portions of the interior here, including the panels and the seats and the headrests, which are separate. And I'm going to add some accent gold to this interior because it's pretty starkly black, and it's very difficult to see any interior detail. So I mounted the pieces, the small pieces, including the headrests and everything, and the parts that I was going to paint gold, and I taped off the appropriate panels and pieces so that I could spray those gold on the interior, and then I gave them a coat of clear flat. I also painted grips on the handbrake and the shift knob on the shifter and I painted those flat black as well. And now we'll assemble those all into the interior by putting the panels in first, and the grip, or I should say the handbrake and the shifter, followed by the seats, and then finally installed the dash into position on the side panels. As I mentioned, I painted my model gold, and in this case I used the Duplicolor primer. So I had tested it out with the spoon test, and then I used a Rust-Oleum metallic gold. It's number 1910830, and it's a really lustrous gold, followed up by a clear coat. You cannot handle these models if you just paint them gold, and silver is also very unforgiving. Without a clear coat, they'll take water spots, and you can't touch them without giving them scratches or marring. So I painted that, and then I put the clear coat on so that it would be durable and handleable. Like most luxury sports cars, the Corvette doesn't have many decals, but it's time to go ahead and place those decals into position. There's some for the door handles and the door locks. There's a Stingray decal on the fender, and the flags are in front. Also, Corvette in the rear, but they're so small they probably won't need decal setting solution, so apply those at this time. After it had dried, I turned the kit over on something soft and painted the roof and the interior sections flat black that are seen through the windows. Normally I would be adding some foil trim to this model, but in this application the new Molotow chrome silver pen worked just fine because the features were available to be scribed or painted with the chrome pen, and they look just great. It's really shiny, and it saved a lot of time. Otherwise, the foil has its place, but in this case, the Molotow chrome pen came to the rescue and saved me a lot of time. Now we're going to grab these parts for the front and rear end to finish those up, and we'll be doing a little bit of work on that hood. And before that, though, we're going to add the decals to the taillight lenses that go into the rear end. Also note that I printed out my logo onto a license plate and sized it up, added some glue or some tape to both sides of it, and then glued it into place in the license plates holder that goes into the rear end. So we also note that we can glue the taillight lenses into the bezels, and then those go in from the inside of the vehicle, and also the license plate holder. Now the bumperettes are actually glued in an unconventional manner to the back of the car, right on some ribs that are molded into the body instead of on posts, etc., or holes. So go ahead and clean those up and put all of those pieces into place. I also wanted to use the USA #1 plate for the front end, so I put that on a piece of thin plastic sheet stock, painted that, and then glued it to the center section there where the plate would go. And as an additional touch, I added some of that crystal clear to the lenses there, because those lenses were white initially on the real car to give it a more realistic appearance. So then go ahead, scrape the chrome plating from where the contact points are around the ridge, and glue the bumper into place now. As I mentioned, we're going to do a little work on the hood. It had been painted gold on both the top and the bottom because the outside edges are still gold. The blank is painted gold at the factory, but it also has an applique of felt there. So what I did was paint that area flat black that would correspond to the felt insert, and then I added some white glue to that so that I could spread some embossing powder onto it. The embossing powders are found at craft shops, and this makes it look almost exactly like a felt insert that would be under hood. You just sprinkle the embossing powder onto the glue and shake off the excess, and then remove the tape, and you've got a really nice look. I deviated from the instructions here because to add the induction cowl duct at the underside of the hood would be futile at this point, because it'd be impossible to line that up exactly to fit around the air cleaner. So we'll add that later on. get these parts out of the kit to add to the underside, and we'll also be removing the paint from the air canister there, or the overflow canister. So add that to a cup with a little bit of Easy Off, and then rinse it off and strip the paint from there and paint it semi-gloss, or I should say a steel color. Now that the canister is dried, go ahead and add that to the platform there at the back end of the inner fender well on the passenger side. And then we're going to locate the fender wells. Now, these are very imprecise because there's no real locating points for these. There's no tabs or anything. So line these up on the inner fenders and then push them all the way forward towards the front end of the car. They'll stop there, and that's the position that they need to be in for your inner fender wells. Now glue the mirror to the windshield. Scrape the chrome off of the end of the mirror there. And then I used some crystal clear. Once again, you can use some white glue to go ahead, put a bead around the windshield there. It'll dry clear, but keep it on the inside, not the outside of the window. And go ahead and place both the front and rear windows into position and let those dry. So the interior can be installed now, and sometimes putting that tub into place is a little tricky. As you see, the white arrows here they indicate a couple of tabs, and you can put some glue towards the top of the door panels and on those tabs at the very back of the package shelf, and also on these small tabs, and slide the interior up from the back towards the front until it stops on those tabs, and those can have a little glue on them too to put the interior into the proper position. Now we can assemble the firewall here, and it has you put everything together, but as I found out later, it probably would have been beneficial to leave the booster and the power brake unit off until after you get the firewall and the engine into place. Nonetheless, the canister and the brake booster are gold on the top, and it also has some silver straps on the brake booster module there. So go ahead and install or paint those up now, and I'll show you how that looks here after it's installed, so that you can see what it should look like, but I'd leave the brake booster off until later. Now we'll mate the body to the chassis, and this is going to take a little bit of patience because you're going to have to wiggle the engine into the compartment, and it almost drops flat straight down, and then just work the motor into position in the engine bay, especially being careful not to snap off the alternator from that fan belt. But once you get it basically into position, she'll drop into place essentially, and then you just wiggle the front and the back. You just kind of move those back and forth until one snaps in, and then down the other end, the front end, until it snaps in under the roll pans there, and you won't need any glue. She'll stay right there. Now we'll revisit adding the shrouding to the underside of the hood to surround the air cleaner for the cowl induction unit. And what we're going to do is we're going to remove the hinge pins from the hood because it's a tapered fit up front, and it easily will fold forward and stay up in position if you want to, but you don't need it at this point, and it will aid in adding the shrouding in the correct position. So what we're going to do is use some slow setting glue and scrape a little of that embossing off, and now tack it to the place and approximately where it should go, and then add the shroud to the underside of the hood, and then put the hood into place and fit that over and around the air cleaner. So it should, once you've got that into position, drop the hood down into place and let that dry, and she'll be a perfect fit. Now we'll add some exterior pieces, including the side pipes and those two chrome mirrors that aren't documented in the kit. I decided to use those to continue the look of gold and chrome elegance that I saw for this model. Remove the chrome plating from the backside of the side pipes, and then add those to the rocker panels underneath the doors, and move the pipes back to where they're just to the end of the front section of the rear inner fender wells, and then glue those in position with some slow setting glue. And now we're going to do the same thing with a little slow setting glue to the exhaust pipes coming out of the exhaust manifolds there, and they get glued to the inside of the side pipes and to the ends of the exhaust manifolds, and then just jockey those into position. You may have to shift side pipes a little bit one way or another, but typically you may end up having to trim just a little bit off of the side pipe end of the exhaust pipes to make those fit just perfectly. As an additional touch, I added a 1/8 inch piece of pinstriping in black to the front end of the cowl induction hood there, just for looks. And after I got that put into place, I gave it a coat of clear flat so that it would look more realistic. These are the parts that you'll have left over from the kit. As I mentioned, I did not make the Yenko version, and that also included a chrome trunk rack, for those long weekend trips. But as you can see, it's an outstanding looking model. And now I'll let you in on why I chose the custom version. When I was in my 20s, I saw a custom gold Corvette come around the corner. It was the most elegant, powerful thing that I had ever seen come out of the Motor City. And I thought to myself, I'm going to have one of those when I get older. And, well, today's the day that I have one of those. So it's not exactly what I had intended, but the insurance is a lot cheaper. And boy, this one's really great on gas. Nonetheless, it's an elegant example and display, and I'm proud to put it on my shelf. So I think you will be too, especially if you build the custom version or the Yenko version, because they're both great looking models and they'll look great on anybody's shelf. So buy one and put it together. And it's really not that hard. You can customize it. There's a lot of different options. You can actually mix and match options. If you want to add Yenko features to your custom vet, you can do that too. But this is the one I saw, and I vowed to have one when I was older. And, well, I'm older, but and now I have one, and that's all I have to say about that. Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas. And so that you don't miss any more of these premium step-by-step reviews, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but you can find us on Facebook or always at our website, www.rightonreplicas.com. Thanks!